Welcome back to Fabulous Creations. I'm Ron Farber-Newman, and this video is the fourth video in the series as I work to convert a standard two-car garage into my dream shop. In this video, we'll focus on insulation, both wall and attic insulation. Now, a contractor who does this type of work every day could have probably had this work done in a weekend, but for me, it was a multi-month process, as one, I was doing the work in my spare time in the evenings and on the weekend, and two, many parts of the garage conversion process were happening asynchronously. But let's head back to August when I kicked off this work, and I'll give you some more background on the decisions I've made along the way as we go. So, in my previous video, I talked about how I had some experience with electrical work, giving me the confidence to do that work myself. Insulation work seemed unintimidating enough, but I'd never actually done it before, so I did plenty of research and YouTube learning to make sure I knew what I needed to know to make educated decisions along the way. One of the first decisions I needed to make was how exactly to insulate the attic space of the garage. A few YouTubers I follow, such as Jay Bates, decided to insulate their shop's attic space with spray foam insulation directly on the roof sheathing. That seemed appealing to me as it would have allowed me to leave the attic space open to the rest of the room below without a formal ceiling in there, allowing me to potentially store lumber up there. However, I decided it wasn't the best option for me despite being a good option for him. One reason is my location. Jay is in Mississippi, where the primary goal most of the year is to keep the extreme heat from the sun beating on the roof from getting in, and since it doesn't get as cold, warming an enclosed space in the winter isn't very hard there. For me, being in Minnesota, we get both extremes of temps, from average 80s to 90s in the summer to low teens and negatives in the winter. Since you're battling the thermodynamic fact that heat rises, you want as much insulation R value between the non-conditioned, non-heated air in the attic and the heated room below as possible. Spray foam insulation, even sprayed thick at 5 inches, would only provide an R value of around R35. And it can be expensive since it's not really a task you want to DIY. I didn't have any formal quote performed, so this could be wildly inaccurate, but from searching around, it seemed like it would have cost around $2,500 or so to have my roof spray foamed. Using fiberglass batt insulation, I could achieve a higher R value of R49 and do it myself for only around $900, the cost of enough R49 insulation for my sized attic. The other option for attic insulation was blown-in insulation, which might have actually been a bit cheaper than batts, but I decided that while I don't ever plan on needing to get back in the attic for additional electrical or duct work, it would be a lot easier to take a batt or two down to get access to the attic than the inevitable mess that would result from trying to cut through the plastic barrier holding back blown-in insulation. So, that was a lot of background on my decision without really explaining what I'm doing in this footage you've been watching. In my research on how to properly insulate, I learned that attic ventilation is arguably the most crucial part of the insulation process. Without proper airflow into and out of the attic, all kinds of problems can arise. The biggest issue is that during the summer, your roof can get so hot that shingles start warping, which will seriously shorten the lifespan of your roof. In the winter, if the heat that does manage to escape past your insulation is allowed to build up in the attic, it causes the surface layer of snow to melt on your roof and cause ice dams and icicles along the roofline. While they're pretty infestive, they're a sign that an attic isn't properly ventilated. To account for this much needed airflow up there, one of the best ways to get it is to have vents on the soffits of your roof's overhang that bring fresh air into the attic to create positive pressure needed to push the warm air that would otherwise accumulate up through the vents in the roof. The roof overhang on our house has vents pre-cut and built into the eave sheathing itself, but the garage did not, so I had to install them, and that's what I'm doing here. I ordered these 4-inch by 16-inch white eave vents to match the white paint of the eave itself. I then determined the center point between the roof joists and cut a roughly 2-inch by 15-inch rectangular hole in each joist bay. I would have liked to make a bigger hole, but because of the pitch of the roof and the limited overhang, that's the maximum hole size I could muster without running into the framing itself. Since this was such a repeatable process, and I had to do it 22 times, I made myself a story stick with the hole's width and distance from the house cut into it to easily mark my location on the eave for where I would drill my starter holes before coming at it with my reciprocating saw. These rectangular holes at times came out a bit ugly and not perfectly rectangular, but since they would be covered up with my eave vent, I wasn't super concerned about how perfect they looked. I used small self-tapping screws to secure each vent in place. It's worth noting that these particular vents have a built-in screen on the backside to prevent bugs from getting in too. Back on the inside of the garage with all my eave vent holes and covers installed, it was time to install some rafter baffles. These are also super important to proper ventilation. What they do is provide an unobstructed channel for that air to travel up into the top of the attic. You may be wondering, why is that necessary? Well, once insulation is installed, that insulation could very well block the flow of air from the eave vents up to the top of the attic where it's needed, as it's not uncommon for the insulation to get pressed right up against the roof sheathing along the lower part of the roofline. With these installed to keep the insulation from blocking the path of airflow, the E-vents can do what they're designed to do. After the rafter baffles were installed, I could get started on the wall insulation, but not before doing some quick spray foam behind the outlet boxes and various places that could use a little sealing up. I don't know if there's a better way of working with this stuff that I don't know about, but it's pretty messy for me. I also underestimated how large it would expand to, requiring me to cut a bunch of it away later once it cured. Oh, and I didn't realize that there's a special version made for door and window casings that expands slower, so by putting it around the door frame here like I did, my door did not want to close properly later after it expanded and cured. I had to install a few screws on the inside of the door frame to pull it back in the other direction. Live and learn. Okay, for real this time. Time for wall insulation. Few things in life are as satisfying as opening a package of fiberglass insulation as it quickly expands to its full uncompressed size after being oppressed by the plastic bag for who knows how long. The installation is fairly straightforward and quick with this stuff as it comes in varying widths to fit the type of construction you might be dealing with. In my case, I was working with 2x4 framing on 16-inch centers, so I used 15-inch wide insulation in R15, the highest R value available for 2x4 framing, with craft backing. All you do to install it is place it snugly in the wall cavity and staple the craft paper wings to the studs on either side, pulling it to stay taut and tight the entire way up and down the wall. I used a combination of a hammer stapler and a regular stapler, where I didn't have enough room to be accurate with a hammer swing, such as at the bottom of the walls. In wall cavities that had wiring running horizontally, I split the insulation in half and sandwiched the wire between the two halves. In cavities that had an outlet, I used my utility knife to cut away the craft paper and the insulation to make room for the outlet. One other consideration I had to make regarding wall insulation was the fact that my walls in the garage are 9 feet tall. Just one panel of the R15 didn't cut it, as the pre-cut bats only come in 93-inch lengths. That's 7 3/4 feet for those playing at home, meaning I was 15 inches short at the top of every cavity. Now sure, I could have just cut the 93-inch bats that come pre-cut, but the R15 insulation I was using here also came in 24-foot rolls, so I wanted to figure out which one made optimal use of materials so I didn't order more than I needed. Being a pretty visual person, using my planning document, I performed the Adobe Illustrator equivalent of counting on my fingers and toes, and determined that 3 24-foot rolls would serve me better and be cheaper than buying additional 93-inch pre-cut packs and produce less waste, so that's what I went with. Cutting the insulation to fill these 15-inch voids was pretty straightforward. I found it easiest to press the insulation as flat as possible along the cut line with one board pressed against another board, and then used a utility knife to make multiple scores until it was fully cut. One thing I can't recommend enough for this type of insulation work is to get a utility knife with easily swappable blades, as fiberglass can dull a blade in no time. I bought a nice pocket knife style folding utility knife that made it super easy to swap out the blades. Just maybe reinforce the spare blade canister with some packing tape like you see here, as I dropped mine off the ladder at one point, causing the new unused blades to go everywhere, and then I had to carefully repackage them in the case without cutting myself. Installing these mini pieces of insulation went just as quick, and I overlapped the craft face from the top panel slightly over the edge of the bottom panel, just like you would do with shingles or siding. In some areas that were otherwise tricky to work with, such as below the breaker panel, I disassembled the insulation and installed it piecemeal, installing a few back panels of insulation between the horizontal 2x4s before covering the whole assembly with a thinner than usual craft back piece. After getting all the wall insulation up, I could finally start getting the ceiling insulation up, which was important if I wanted to be able to start using the heat function of my new ductless mini split unit as our autumn temperatures started to drop. As I began to open the outer shrink wrap of the ceiling insulation, I made a startling discovery that's especially frustrating when I look back at how I've lamented about pre-ordering all the supplies that then got in my way. And you know what that was? The ceiling insulation that has been in my way for the past 11 months was the wrong size. I accidentally ordered 16-inch wide R49 instead of 24-inch wide R49, which is how wide my joists are. They are not a sponsor, but thankfully I ordered all these supplies with my Home Depot credit card, which meant that the normal 180-day return window got extended to a year. So I got really lucky, as that would have been around a $900 mistake. Sure, I could have probably sold it on Craigslist, but I doubt I would have gotten what I paid. So I returned it and promptly ordered the correct width, which got delivered a week later. Getting the R49 installed was pretty easy and a very similar process to installing the wall insulation, except you're stapling above you rather than straight out at the wall in front of you, making it awkward at times. I did observe that the accidentally ordered R49 was 16 inches wide instead of 15 inches wide like the wall insulation was, and that this is 24 inches wide instead of 23 inches. I think for wall insulation they take off an inch to make it fit exactly between the studs, but for ceiling applications they leave the extra inch to make the fit nice and snug so it's not falling down at you while you try to install it. The first row of R49 was kind of annoying as it was the end joist space and not as wide as the standard 24-inch bays, which meant I had to cut it down the long side. But otherwise it was a breeze and easy to maneuver despite its increased volume compared to the R15. Thankfully they limited it to 4-foot lengths, as I imagine it would be too heavy to easily manipulate if it were made in longer lengths. So the R49 outfitted the centermost parts of the ceiling, but the pad that I ordered was only able to cover 384 square feet, and my garage ceiling was slightly larger than that. Here's how I decided to contend with that. The very edges of my ceiling against the two walls where the roofline tapered downwards weren't tall enough to receive the full height of the R49 insulation anyway, so I decided to buy a few rolls of R19 insulation in the same 24-inch widths to fill these remaining spaces, quite like how I used the R15 to fill in my gaps at the top of the walls. But the R19 insulation, while it fit closest to the wall, still had a decent amount of space above it on the edge where it met the R49 insulation. To account for this, I got a little scrappy, literally, and used all of my cut scraps from the wall insulation and my ceiling insulation, which I had saved in a garbage bag along the way, to fill these voids before moving on to the next joist bay. I thought this was a good way to use my scraps while optimizing the insulation in these areas. For the final two end pieces, the keystones of my ceiling insulation if you will, I used a spare R49 piece, cut in half, and then into two very crude trapezoids to fill in the space in a similar way, without being able to access it from the side. And right as I was finishing my ceiling installation work, I got to see its effectiveness in action. We got about 5 to 6 inches of snow when I had just 1 or 2 joist bays left, but since it was a tad chilly, I had the heat on there, despite not being all the way done. Looking at the garage roof from the house, you could clearly see the outline of the joist bays with no insulation melting the snow, and the rest of the roof was otherwise unmelted. After sealing those final bays up, the melting stopped and I could finally start leaving the heat on low in there to make it always ready for me to come out there and work. So that was a doozy, filled with what probably seemed like too much information. But I figure there's a lot of DIY videos out there that tell you what they're doing without really telling you why they're doing it. So hopefully you found my thought process useful if you find yourself doing your own DIY installation project. So with that, let's end this video here, and in the next video in the series we'll cover wall and ceiling coverings as well as touch on the mini split briefly. Now I know a lot of the plywood work was done and visible within some of the footage within this video. But a big multifaceted project like a garage finishing has many parts happening at once, so if it sometimes seems like we're taking a step back to review part of the project that's already done, it's because we kind of are. Hope that's okay. So be sure to subscribe if you want to stay tuned for that, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!